Thank you, Kelsey. I want to thank Skylight Books for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for all coming out. I know every face here, so I appreciate that. If you don't know about JON FIXX, he is a writer by trade, and he writes love stories for couples that are about to get married. That's how he makes his living. This piece that I'm going to read actually takes place in the past, but it gives you a good idea of his development and where he comes from. Okay. The title of this particular section is Jennifer Breaker. It's a girlfriend of his. College was expensive, and I was on a full academic scholarship. One key reason I never felt like I fit in. I didn't have the money most of my fellow students had, or more accurately, their families had. I had entered the school feeling like an outsider, and this feeling grew with each passing semester. My disaffection with the whole institution and its inhabitants, both students and professors, mounted each year, while at the same time, my friendship with Lucy grew. I spent more and more time off campus, an unusual habit for a student attending a school with such a small, insular population. But in the fall semester of my junior year, I met Jennifer Breaker in an upper-level anthropology course, which was my major in an area of study for which I was a shoo-in to receive departmental honors when I graduated. She clearly had a chip on her shoulder about life in general, and her parents specifically. She did her best not to fit in, and dating me worked perfectly. I was madly in love with her. She was upper middle class, on partial scholarship, smart, and with an off-center attractiveness. There's no need here to describe the ups and downs of our relationship, but it is important to point out that it lasted exactly 1 year, literally. On our first anniversary, when all I could think about was what we'd be doing at the end of the evening, Jennifer was in a completely different frame of mind and body. I thought things were going great. She didn't. Apparently, a recurring pattern in my life. On that fateful night, Jennifer told me she was having personal problems. She needed some space. I couldn't understand what personal issue she was talking about because I knew all about her personal life. We were in college, we spent almost all our time together, and we had even decided to take another anthropology course together. But she said she needed more space than she could find within the bounds of a relationship. It's not you, John. It's me, she said with a sad frown and a tear in her eye. So on the night of our anniversary, I became a blubbering idiot, saying all kinds of overly dramatic things like, God, I love you so much. I don't know what I'll do without you. And I've never held someone's hand the way I've held yours. And you are the most special person I've ever been with. I'll be lost without you. But the capper, said my attempt to be a bigger man than I truly was, dribbled out of my mouth. If this is what you want and what you need for your own personhood, then I want this too, because I want what you want. I want what's best for you. At the time, I meant every word I said. At least I wanted to believe I did. I knew that last bit was a load of crap, but it sounded good. I was trying a weak attempt at reverse psychology, which failed miserably. What I really wanted was for her to shut up, stop saying the things she was saying, and have sex with me. Instead, she said, John, are you okay with this? I know you're super sensitive and tend to blow everything out of proportion. That one hit so close to home I got defensive, but I knew I couldn't show it. I had to be careful. So I looked into her eyes with all the sincerity I could muster, and I said, I truly want whatever's going to make you happy. A look of guilt and relief crossed Jennifer's face, and then it was gone, covered with sadness. Suddenly, I wondered if there was more to this than she was admitting. Was there somebody else? So I asked, John, come on, look at me. I love you. This doesn't have to do with anybody else. I just need space. Yeah, I have a lot going on personally in my head. What was she talking about? This was the first I'd heard about stuff going on in her head. Well, like with my parents and everything. Her parents have been divorced 5 years. And I just feel like I can't give you what you need right now. I couldn't understand what she was talking about. Mostly what I needed was sex. It wasn't that complicated. But Jennifer was intractable, and nothing I said, sorry Zion, nothing I said could change her mind, so we broke up on our anniversary. I spent the rest of the week going to classes like a zombie. On Friday, we shared anthropology theory class with Professor Benedict, one of the few professors I actually admired. I got to class late and sat in the front row. She gave me a sympathetic, pained smile from the second row as I walked into the room. My return smile was a failed imitation. Dr. Benedict patted me on the back as I passed him on my way to my seat. How you doing, Fix? I nodded to him. I'd taken other classes with Benedict, liking him so much that I picked him to be my advisor. Benedict was in his early 30s, very bright and cocky, but an atypical professor nonetheless. He was handsome, charming, and he had a loose teaching style. Many of the co-eds had crushes on him. I'd heard stories, but I didn't much care because his classes were some of my favorite. I listened to Dr. Benedict's lecture and heard nothing he said. I could feel Jennifer's presence on my skin. The minutes ticked interminably by on the clock hanging high up in the front of the room. Class was 90 minutes long, and I felt every one of them. Inadvertently, I'd glance over my shoulder at Jennifer, who seemed completely wrapped with Benedict's lecture on the development of anthropological theory in the early 20th century. Fully engaged, taking notes, intently listening. I was overcome with the urge to scream at the students sitting there, at Jennifer, at Benedict. They all looked so smug and content, hiding in this little cocoon of costly higher education. John, you have a question? Dr. Benedict was staring at me. He'd stopped talking. The rest of the class had their eyes on me as well. I realized I was standing up. My urge to scream had propelled me out of my seat. No, just stretching. Sorry, Dr. Benedict. I sat down, embarrassed, frustrated, overwhelmed. I ducked low in my seat, staring straight ahead, keeping my focus on the front blackboard as best I could, and off the woman 1 row and 4 seats over who was creating such an emotional storm inside me. I didn't really know how to behave. Jennifer and I were no longer together, no longer a couple, but we were sitting 20 feet apart in a classroom we would share for the rest of the semester. 8 more weeks. The thought of it made me sick to my stomach. Then I heard a rustling behind me. The students were packing away their notes and books, getting ready to move on. I looked up at the clock. It's 10:20 a.m. Class was over. Benedict wrapped up his lecture, leaving us with a question for the next class. Students headed out the door. I didn't move. If I left first and didn't say goodbye to Jennifer, then I'd feel like the bad guy. But if I waited for her to leave and she left without saying goodbye, then I'd feel like crap. So I did nothing. I left the decision for her. John? I looked up from my backpack. She was standing beside me, her voice dripping with sympathy. What did that mean? That she felt sorry for me? That she wasn't having any trouble with this? Hi. How you doing? Fine. A moment of uncomfortable silence followed. The final few students filed out of the classroom. Dr. Benedict was just finishing packing up his briefcase. He looked up at me from the front of the room. Hey, John, we still on for tomorrow to discuss your thesis? Yeah. Great, look forward to it. Bye, Jen. Jennifer smiled and waved to him. Bye, Professor Benedict, she tittered, the sympathetic tone gone completely for a moment. Then she turned back to me, the brief smile replaced with a sad frown. I just wanted to say hi, John. Hi. Okay. Listen, I'm sorry about all this. I nodded, looking out the window for fear my emotions might take over and I'd either start to cry or grab her by the neck and throttle her right there in the classroom. I stared at the East Coast autumn, trees with leaves of deep reds and light purples and soft greens visible beyond the window frame. Well, John, I'm going to go now. I got to get to my next class. I nodded without looking at her. She turned her back to me, walking toward the door, but hesitated after 3 steps and looked back over her shoulder. I gazed out the window. She sighed and turned away from me. As she reached the doorway, the urge to speak to her was so strong I couldn't stop myself. Jennifer! She stopped in the doorway and turned to me. Yeah? Are you okay? She smiled sadly. I'm okay. The smile made my heart skip. Well, good. I just wanted to make sure you're okay. I nodded uncomfortably, indicating I didn't have much else to say. Jennifer stood silently in the doorframe for another moment. I shrugged my shoulders, trying to get comfortable with my body, still unclear how to act. Jennifer realized I had nothing more to add, so without another word between us, she left. Bye, Jennifer, I muttered. I remained in my chair at the front of the lecture hall. I stared at the large oak tree outside the window, the first leaves of winter dropping before my eyes to the ground. Lost in my reverie, I missed the students entering for the next class, and before I knew it, I was listening to a lecture on the history of modern dance in the United States with the focus that day on Twyla Tharp. Unwilling to bring attention to myself, I sat through the class, feigning note-taking. The only fact I took from the class was that Twyla Tharp, a dancer and choreographer, had written and published 2 books, one her autobiography, the other a guide on living the creative life. If Twyla Tharp can get published, muttered, so can I. By that point, I'd been working on my first novel since the summer before entering college, figuring, I'd be able to finish it once all this college work was out of the way. I was hoping to be like Bret Easton Ellis, but at the rate I was going, it looked like I was going to be the next John Nobody. When class ended, I unobtrusively made my escape and wandered off campus down the small city street to my apartment. As a senior, I had the luxury of being able to live off campus, and I much preferred it. I lived in a one-bedroom conversion above a garage that I had found for cheap in the back of a 4-unit apartment building. It was far less than I would have paid for campus housing, and the location was private, so it worked for me. The garage backed up to a junior high school parking lot cum playground. My day from 8 to 10 a.m. to 3:10 p.m. was defined by the bell system of the junior high's class schedule. Arriving at the front of the fourplex, I took a look up and down the street. An occasional car passed in both directions. I looked at my watch. It was almost noon. Other students filtered down the street, ostensibly heading for their domiciles and lunch. I looked up at the sky. Blue as could be, the temperature moderate, somewhere in the high 60s, a beautiful East Coast October day. But I felt empty and lost. I crossed the backyard and climbed the stairs to my small apartment. Once inside, I grabbed a beer from the fridge, dropped on the couch, and started drinking, doing my best to think about nothing. But Jennifer's face kept crossing my mental screen no matter how hard I tried not to think about her. At some point, I passed out, many beers already down my throat. I woke with a start. I must have been asleep for hours because it was almost dark outside. My reality quickly jumped to the foreground of my thoughts as I stared at the ceiling. Jennifer's face etched across the smooth surface. Hoping to distract myself, even though I could tell I was still inebriated, I grabbed a rolled joint from the kitchen drawer where I stashed them and lit up. I tried to relax as the joint slowly burned away, but it was all to no avail. My head began to spin. What was she doing at that very moment? We often spent Friday nights at her apartment watching movies. And like me, she didn't like going to parties. She felt they were juvenile. I mean, like me, she was not a big fan of the college drink fests. Her schoolwork came first and everything else came second, including me now, I guess. Overcome with a wave of loneliness, I moved over to my bed, staring at the ceiling as the fullness of the evening darkness filled my room. Lucy was visiting Izzy in Philly, so I couldn't call him for emotional support. My digital clock across the room read 8:42 p.m. I knew there was only one salve for my loneliness: Jennifer. In short order, I logically convinced myself that Jennifer missed me, that even if she wanted to remain broken up, she'd be happy to see me. She was probably at home right now, mooning around in her room just like I was. Once the idea entered my mind, the decision to go was a fait accompli. It would have taken gargantuan self-discipline on my part to take a contrary action. I was craving a fix, and Jennifer's face was both the drug and the antidote. So with purpose, I threw my jacket over my shoulders and headed out the door. I crossed the yard to the alley. I could hear an amalgam of male and female voices coming from one of the apartments above, music underlying the chatter. I walked down the alley at a brisk pace, turning the corner at the front of the house, heading east. There was a slight chill in the air. I shuddered, the cold seeping under my skin, my drunken high not keeping me as warm as I expected. I was shivering and moving a little faster with a slight sway to my stride. Jennifer lived 6 blocks down and 4 blocks over, 10 minutes at best. I covered the first few blocks at a fast clip, slowing down as I got closer, suddenly reconsidering my approach. What if she didn't want to see me? What if she told me she wanted to date other people? What if I came within a block of her apartment duplex? I kicked the negative thoughts out of my head. Of course she'd be glad to see me. I mean, she might be mad at first, but that'd change once we start talking. I took a deep breath and walked the length of the last block, passing the duplex and fourplex apartments lining the street. I stopped in front of the light blue East Coast traditional that was Jennifer's. She lived in the 4-bedroom unit on the first floor with 3 roommates. The second story was an identical unit, also full of students. The house was dark and the lights were out. Obviously no one was there. Jennifer was not home. Doubt crept into my mind. I walked around to the side walkway between the houses and crossed down the middle. Over the last year, I had developed a habit of climbing into Jennifer's bedroom through her window so I wouldn't disturb her roommates' rabid reality television viewing. They were usually sprawled out in the communal living room watching TV, and I had to cross in front of them to get to Jennifer's room. So over time, I stopped using the front door altogether. Jennifer left the window unlocked, and I never had any trouble getting in. As I reached her window, my heart rate increased. I stepped off the path onto the large brick I'd placed there and reached up to the windowsill. I laid my hands on the bottom of the window gripped and pulled up. The window slid easily. I smiled, pleased with myself. I took this as a sign that Jennifer wanted me to do this. She'd intentionally left that window unlocked, hoping I'd come over. Quietly, I slipped inside and closed the window behind. I looked around her room. It looked exactly as it had when I'd last been there less than a week before. The vanity mirror and chair in the corner, the television up on top of her tall dresser in the other corner, pink accents throughout, and a large four-poster with a white bedspread and a bunch of extra-large pillows at the head of the bed. I stood still, taking it all in. I could smell the soft, citrusy scent of Jennifer's lotion. I closed the window and crossed over to the bed, taking a seat. I reached down and untied my shoelaces, setting my shoes on the floor beside the bed. I laid my head back on the pillows and I tried to get comfortable, but I couldn't do it. I felt uneasy, like an intruder. What if she came home and completely rejected me? But how was that possible? How could she do that, considering everything we had shared over the last year? Could a few days apart wipe away all those feelings? I decided that wasn't possible. So I settled back in the pillows, only slightly satisfied with my thoughts, the uneasy feelings lingering. But as the minutes ticked by, my muscles relaxed, and I was seduced by the soft feel of the bedspread coupled with the effects of the alcohol and the marijuana in my body. I fell into an easy stupor. I yawned, glancing at the clock. It was 9:10 p.m. I turned my eyes back to the ceiling, and before I knew it, I was asleep. I woke to voices. My head was fuzzy. At first, I couldn't remember where I was. I turned to the clock, 10:11. Suddenly, my head cleared, and I remembered what I was doing, realizing immediately something was wrong. The voices were getting closer, coming down the hallway toward Jennifer's room. I could discern Jennifer's voice, and I realized that the voice answering her was male. They were almost at the door. I panicked, grabbing my shoes and slipping them on without tying the laces. I stood up, looking across the room at the window. Jennifer was at the door. I heard her pull her key out. She always locked it because she didn't like her roommates having access. The key was in the lock. I calculated the time it would take to cross the room, open the window, and climb out. I'd never make it. So the key rattling in the lock sounded like a bomb going off in my ears. Frantically, my eyes jumped around the room, searching for an escape, suddenly landing on the closet door. As quietly as I could, I slithered across the room, grabbed the closet door handle, opened it, and slid inside. I heard the hallway door opening as I pulled the door shut. I held my breath, wondering if Jennifer had seen the door or heard me moving. I slid as far back into the closet away from the door as I could. I stood tense, waiting to be discovered, but that didn't happen. I relaxed a little, only then overcome with a wave of immense jealousy. It was past 10 o'clock p.m. on a Friday night, and she had a guy in her room, a date. I'm at home getting drunk and high to assuage myself, and she's out getting it on with someone else? Their voices pounded on my ears through the closet door. The male voice familiar to me. He spoke with the intelligent tone of an older man, not the swallowed vocabulary and slang of a student. Are you sure your roommates will not be home soon? Alan, I'm sure. They're at an all-night Kappa Sigma party. I won't see them again until tomorrow. We're completely alone. Anyways, I asked them for some privacy. What? You did? The male voice seemed alarmed. I hope you didn't tell them why. No, silly. Jeez, you're such a worrier. Just relax. We have to be careful, you understand. I knew the voice, but I couldn't place it. Jennifer giggled. Don't worry, Professor. Your secret's safe with me. It clicked. Dr. Benedict, that son of a bitch. There was silence, then the rustling of clothing. Sorry, Z. I took a step forward. There was no way I was going to allow this to go on any further. I pushed the clothing out of my way, about to grab the door handle when Dr. Benedict interrupted their festivities. Did you hear something? Are you sure no one's home? There was a pause. Alan, you're so jumpy. Stop worrying. There's nobody here. I considered bursting out of the closet and scaring the hell out of both of them and tell my lying, backstabbing advisor that I knew his dirty little secret and was going to make sure the entire world knew it as well. But then in the next instant, I considered the bigger picture. And that's where my best choice of action became a little fuzzy. I'd have to explain what I was doing in the closet because technically I was breaking and entering. In addition, the thought of what the student population would think of my actions gave me pause. There would be no end to their contempt. I would not be able to hold my head up again anytime I walked on campus. Oh, there goes the guy who hid in his ex-girlfriend's closet. I could hear them laughing. So my fear of being considered less than a man by the general population kept me hiding in my ex-girlfriend's closet, listening to her and my college advisor become intimate. The sounds of sexual excitement emanated through the closet door. Jennifer exhaled passionately. I knew that noise. She made it whenever I kissed the back of her neck. It had taken me 6 months to discover that little trick. This guy had it in one night? Unless, how long had this been going on? There was a soft thud. They were on the bed. I didn't feel my fists clenching, nor did I realize my fingernails were biting into my palm so hard they drew blood. Sounds of them rolling around in the bed filled the closet with a claustrophobic air. I was close to hyperventilating. I was not sure how much more of this I could take. The sound of shoes dropping onto the wood floor followed. And I'm going to stop for one moment. Given the children, I'm skipping, guys. And like an orchestra hitting the final note in one large crescendo, my ex-girlfriend and my thesis advisor were done. Also shortened. Then silence. Well, I'd come over looking for some kind of answer as to why Jennifer wanted so much space, and I found it. Now all I wanted to do was get out of there as quickly as possible. I hoped they would leave and I could exit quietly, undiscovered. That was incredible, Jennifer sighed. The torture continued. I agree. A pause. So what's going on with you and JON FIXX? I sat up ramrod straight. Oh, Alan, you were so crass. Do we have to talk about my ex-boyfriend right after? Jeez, I broke up with him. He's really sweet, you know, he's just too intense for me. And, you know, there was you. For the first time that night, I felt tears burning my eyes. I realized that up to this point, I've been thinking of everything I just heard as, you know, just what they'd been doing. But it was more than that. Jennifer was over me. Are you sure your roommates aren't coming home? I'm sure. There was silence. Moments later, the sounds of quiet snoring crossed my closet threshold. Benedict had fallen asleep. I checked my watch, 11:45. I waited. The snoring continued, and I heard no movement or rustling. I stood as quietly as possible and slowly pushed my way through the clothes to the front of the closet. Silently, I placed my hand on the doorknob as softly as I could manage. I turned the knob and guided the door open, peeking out. Benedict was sprawled on his stomach, his left leg crooked, his right arm hanging over the bed. The guy sure knew how to make himself comfortable. Jennifer lay on her back, her eyes closed, her breathing regular. Carefully, I inched the door open and stepped into the room, trying to keep my eyes on the path to the window. As I crossed in front of the bed, my eyes fell on Jennifer's painted toes peeking out from beneath the loose sheet. I followed the outline of her legs up over her stomach. She lay there looking innocent in repose. Her eyelids fluttered and then opened. Her face registered silent shock. She inhaled. I imagined a scream would follow. I raised my right index finger to my lips, shh, instructing her to stay silent. We locked eyes for a moment. She sat up slightly on her elbows. I kept my fingers at my lips. Benedict stirred in his sleep, then settled back into bed. I stared at her for a moment longer, then turned away quickly, crossed the room, and opened the window. Without looking back, I climbed out and left. That night, I went back to my apartment, packed up all my belongings, and I moved out the next morning. I found a generic apartment in a working-class part of town, void of college students, rent paid by the hard-earned wages of those living there, not by bourgeois parents. I formally dropped out of college the following Monday. I never spoke to Jennifer again. Prior to the end of the term, with the use of my computer in the local library, I finished the thesis I'd started with Benedict, probably the best research paper I'd ever written in my college career. I sent it to him in an anonymous envelope with no return address. I tacked a note on the front of it that said, God knows your sins, so do I. Revenge belongs to the righteous. At the time, it sounded powerful. A few years later, Benedict was driving home from a night out with another young female professor. I guess he decided it wasn't wise to keep tapping the undergraduate population, and their car was struck by a drunk driver running a red light. Both professors were killed instantly. By that point, I held no ill will for Benedict. Too much time had passed, and I felt sadness for his family, wherever they were. A few days after the accident, I received a phone call from Jennifer, the only time she tried to contact me before or since. To this day, I don't know what his death signified for her or why it motivated her to call me, but I didn't care. Unlike my feelings for Benedict, Jennifer I had not forgiven. I did not call her back. In the long run, though, Jennifer's betrayal was a boon of sorts. I have no idea where I'd be if I'd finished college, graduated, and then tried to figure out the next step in my life. My choices may have ended up generic and mundane, maybe graduate school or a 9-to-5. As it was, Jennifer's actions forced me to think outside the box, to push my creative envelope to find out what I was made of, which, with the help of a little serendipity, led me to my current profession. It all began with the first job I scored after leaving college.